We think that grace, I think in this generation, is a case of loving everyone and condoning everything. I love to love people in all of their walks of life, whatever they're choosing to do. But I think true love and true grace comes also in the lifting up of other people, even when they've hurt us. So we're seeing an awful lot of backlash with the royal family, the institution at the moment. I'm sad by that because the Queen has served the country. I think Galatians talks about that we've been called to be in liberty, but we don't use liberty for our own flesh. We use it to love and serve another. And so what does real justice look like? It's the lifting up of the other side of the party.
Welcome to Cultural Catalyst. I'm your host, Kris Vallotton. This is a place where you learn how to live fully alive, co-labor with God, and change the world. And today I have Carrie Lloyd with me. Carrie, you worked for me for about 5 years. You're a pastor, a life coach, and actually you've written several books.
Yes.
And today we want to talk about one of the books you wrote called The Noble Renaissance, about nobility. So why don't we just tell us a little bit about you before we talk about the book?
Gosh, I really struggle to know how to describe myself, but a few different stages in life. But only child, Baptist ministers from England, became an atheist when I was in my early 20s, and then sort of came back to the Lord around about the end of my 20s after sort of slowly eating my ego. And then...
Eating your ego?
Eating my ego.
That's
that
a good
needed
line
to be
right
eaten.
there.
And then I came to Bethel age of 32. And for a lot of my 20s and 30s working in the film industry and advertising, I was a journalist, and I was often talking about people and relationships mainly. And I just didn't want to stereotype myself as being the single girl of Christianity.
Yeah.
And so I started just talking and analysing how we do what we do, why we do what we do, and then relating it slowly to the gospel again because I was coming back to the Lord. So then I became obsessed with character, probably about the age of 35, 30.
A character or the idea of character?
The character.
The character.
How we do character.
How we do have character.
Yeah. And there's this lovely, David Brooks wrote this lovely book called The Road to Character, which made me absolutely fascinated with extraordinary people doing extraordinary things that are just mind-blowing. And we might call them heroes, but I just found it like you're doing exactly what the gospel suggests for us to do, but it's the hardest choice. Being noble is the hardest choice.
Okay, we can't go on.
We won't go there yet.
No, we're going to go there, but nobility, the word noble, the word nobility, is kind of lost in our culture.
Totally.
Like I'll write a blog about nobility, and then people are like, "What does the word noble mean?" You know, it's kind of the quote out of Braveheart. You know, when William Wallace says to Robert the Bruce, "What does it mean to be noble?"
Right. Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And so, what does it mean to be noble?
I really like A.W. Tozer's
Come on.
He calls it the excellence of moral beings, because I think sometimes people see the word noble and they think it's related to royalty, and they think it's aristocracy. They think it's essentially the nobleman that we read of in the Bible.
Yeah, there you go. Robert the Bruce. What does it mean to be noble?
Exactly. And so actually I loved A.W. Tozer's description because that made so much more sense to me of this obsession that I had with the excellence of people's character when people were doing above and beyond what was necessarily expected of them. I feel the presence of the Lord the most when I see someone forgive the unforgivable. When I see someone reach out in a moment that we might want to counsel them. I feel the presence of the Lord in those moments. And I would often weep about 7 times a day in the office, perhaps behind closed doors, when I was witnessing kindness, even when I was an atheist. So I was definitely kind of moved so much by integrity and humility and the things that keep us persevering, the moments of endurance, these wild stories you would hear about missionaries and what they would do in the name of justice, but always a way of lifting up, never a tearing down. And that for me was nobility.
Wow.
And that's our podcast.
There's the whole podcast. What made you decide to write a book about it?
I think because I was writing so much about relationships, and I'm like, actually, this is just about character, why we do what we do, how we treat people. This is really just about character. It's nothing to do with relationships and stuff, or love or romance. We would get heartbroken by potentially how we would treat each other. Heartbreak was much easier when we were kind to each other in the journey of departure. And I think I just became so obsessed with the concept of character, and I was asking, most of our conversations as pastors in the office is talking about what's the noble choice, what's the right choice. And so I became obsessed with this concept of nobility. It's not just about good character, it's about great character. What makes you have a noble character? What made the likes of a Martin Luther King kneel on Selma Bridge rather than join the riots and the violence? It's those moments that I got so fascinated, and then started to do, probably a few years before I wrote the book. A friend of mine had taken me into Westminster Palace, which is where House of Commons and the House of Lords is. You've been there. You know how wild and beautiful it is. Did you ever go into this? This sounds like this is never a conversation I have with people.
I've been in the palace and everything.
Have you been in the throne room?
I have.
So you know where you've got. It might have changed now with the death of the Queen, but you had a picture of the Queen and you had a picture of Duke of Edinburgh, and then you had those almost like Rubens paintings around the room. I don't know whether you can remember.
Yeah.
But on each of those paintings were virtues. So it would be courage, generosity, those kind of things. About 5 different virtues.
I don't remember that though.
And I'll have to start sending you a picture of it. But
wow.
It made me go, oh, there are a collection of virtues that make a noble character, which is often related to royalty. But of course, you can be a royal and completely obliterate your own role and use it for your own ego. The idea, Galatians talks about serving another.
And if you're a believer, you are part of royalty.
Yeah, exactly.
You're part of a royal priesthood.
And that's what I loved about your Supernatural Ways of Royalty. I loved that book because it was probably the seed that made me go, yeah, what are the virtues of royalty? What are the virtues of noble character? And so I kind of, then I just became, I struggle talking about the subject because I don't want to sound like I'm an expert on it, because then I have to be noble myself. I'd much rather say I'm a student of the topic, and I get it wrong all the time.
Nobility.
Yeah, yeah. And so I create this fascination for about a year and a half on what are the virtues that create a noble character, and I came out with about 7, and that's essentially.
Can you name them?
I actually put it on a list because I can't. I always miss one.
Oh, you got notes.
So I put it on a list.
So smart.
Because thanks, you're welcome. Well, it was you. I had to do a good job.
Okay.
So integrity was one of them. Self-sacrifice, wisdom, humility, perseverance, and honor in justice, so compassion, and then the ability to process pain well.
Wow.
When I finished the book, I got to the end of it, and the Lord said, "Do you notice anything?" And I said, "Well, that we finished." And He said, "No, it's actually." The virtues I gave you were the antithesis to the 7 deadly sins.
Wow.
So integrity is the opposite of envy. Processing pain is the opposite of gluttony. We're often gluttonous when we're wanting to suffocate that pain and push it down. Self-sacrifice is the opposite of greed. Wisdom is the opposite of lust. It's wise if we don't go into our lustful ways. It's wise if we work out how to love people well. Humility was the opposite of pride. Perseverance was the opposite of sloth. And then honor and justice was the opposite of wrath. So when we get very wild and angry at justice stuff, so that's kind of, that became like,
that's
profound, that makes sense to me. I know, I should put that up on a plaque or something.
That's actually profound.
Really? Oh, good.
How do you think that, I want to talk more about that too.
Yeah.
There's a question that's written for me, and it would be a question that would generate for me too. How do you think the grace gospel lends itself to a generation of lost nobility or nobility? How do you think grace fits into this? Yeah,
well, you see, it's a great question, because I think if we look at justice, for example, and the honor in justice, when we feel we have faced an injustice, our natural ability is to teach, to punish, to find vengeance on some level.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the cancel culture at this particular moment in time, that we think that we'll teach people a lesson if we cancel, instead of actually look at ways to find unity, of ways to, if we look at how justice was handled by a just man in the Bible, let's talk about Joseph, perfect timing, because we're into Christmas. He was seen as a just man, and when
Joseph of the New Testament.
Joseph and Mary.
Yeah, Joseph and Mary.
So if we're looking at him as a just man, he was Mary being, before he was given his own revelation, the Lord taught to him, he was struggling with the injustice of his
Mary being pregnant.
Right.
Before he
and that would have been an
he knew
executional.
he didn't make her pregnant.
Right. So he's navigating the injustice of all of that, and of course his options were that he could have stoned her, but he was making a decision that he was going to quietly divorce her. That was his way of navigating his own boundaries, but also making sure that she was still being lifted up, regardless of the actual action. We think that grace, I think in this generation, is a case of loving everyone and condoning everything. I love to love people in all of their walks of life, whatever they're choosing to do. But I think true love and true grace comes also in the lifting up of other people, even when they've hurt us. So we're seeing an awful lot of backlash with the royal family, the institution at the moment. I'm sad by that because the Queen has served the country. I think Galatians talks about that we've been called to be in liberty, but we don't use liberty for our own flesh. We use it to love and serve another. And so what does real justice look like? It's the lifting up of the other side of the party. That's the hardest thing. And this is why nobility is so hard it's a hard choice. We haven't been given necessarily the adversity like perhaps generations have had to do before. If you think about even just
People think they have that.
They do. And I think that if you think about just hiring a film, you just have to click a button these days. But if Blockbuster Video,
yeah.
I use this analogy all the time because it seems to be the best one for me. If you wanted to watch a film, you'd have to discuss with everyone what you wanted to watch, drive to Blockbuster, and then you would have to take the third option that you had because the first one had been sold out by everyone on Saturday night. Then you had to go and take the VHS to the counter, take it home, realise that they hadn't rewound it, the people before hadn't rewound it, so you had to rewind it, and then you would be charged a late fee if you didn't bring it back the next day, and you had to rewind it. So you had a lot of things that implicated flexibility, navigation, and the ability to be able to compromise and change things around and to think of others. We're getting less and less of those opportunities just on a day-to-day basis. We don't have Blockbuster Video anymore because we have everything on demand. And I think I like adversity. There's a really fascinating book called, I don't know whether you've ever read it, and I'll give you a copy if you haven't got it because it's fascinating. But it talks about the coddling of the American mind and why we're setting up the next generation for failure. And it talks about the fact...
What's the name of the book? Do you remember?
That's the name of it.
Oh, that's the title.
The longest title in the world. You know the journey of being an author. They were like, well,
none of my team was in there when we created that title. That's for sure.
So it's a really fascinating. It's written by two psychiatrists, and it talks about the importance of adversity, having pushback.
Yeah.
And us as parents teaching our children how to tell them how to navigate adversity. And it's not a case of just cutting out and cancelling out. Lawnmower parenting, helicopter parenting has actually added to this point of like, we just don't want to cause any anxiety to any of our children. And so we'll just make a pathway that's nice and smooth for them. The problem is we're not learning how to navigate perseverance, endurance, the things that actually build us with a better resistible muscle, if that makes sense. So I find it fascinating that I think not just the grace-led movement, I think I understand the concept of that because we were bashing against the legalism of religion.
Yeah.
But with pendulum swing to go, actually, we still have to make tough choices. This wasn't supposed to be an easy ride necessarily.
Yeah.
But what I found is every time I'm trying to make a noble choice, even though it's harder, there's a liberty to it because I knew that I kept my path clear in the journey, and I tried to be kind even when I faced injustice. I tried to honour even if I didn't feel like they deserved to be honoured in that moment. It's important for us to still do that so that we retain unity.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Oh, my mind's exploding with things I would preach right now, but I'm interviewing you.
Is anyone taking notes?
Yeah, because I think the idea of temptation is important for nobility.
I agree, absolutely.
Because temptation doesn't identify me.
Right.
What I do with temptation identifies me.
Right.
So, but this generation, in and out of the church, is identifying with their temptation.
Yeah.
I am a homosexual because I have same-sex attraction.
And their identity is attached to those things.
Well, once you say I am,
right.
then I'm not going to resist what I am.
Right. What's interesting to me as well is even on any of the journeys of whatever we struggle with, we've become attached to that thing. One of the things that I find really fascinating at the moment is the inability to have conversations about difference of opinions whilst also being honourable with it, is because we've attached all of our identities. Someone was saying to me the other day, I know this is going to be a tough subject for me to talk to you about the royal family because your identity is attached to it. And I went, no, it's not. I feel very passionate about the royal family because I've really loved how the Queen has served a country for 75 years and has had to die to the crown over and over again in order to keep some sense of peace ambassadorship. And I don't think we're actually looking at what creates peace, what creates unity. We look at the racial injustice of what people are going through at the moment, and racial reconciliation is so important in today's society. But I think what's important is that we recognise we don't start putting a load of different labels onto everyone. We're trying to create rhetoric that seems to appease us rather than going, that stings. How do I navigate not my reaction, but my response? Because we react to everything now. We're not choosing how to respond because we seem to think that the agreement is the thing that keeps us safe. It's not. I don't need to have the world to be safe around me. I don't have to have the world to agree with me. I actually need to make myself safe by building trust within myself. And the only way I build trust within myself is by honouring a sense of character and nobility, by honouring some of the wisdom that we've been taught by the Lord.
And I would say the pushback is that if I feel it, but I behave a different way, then I'm acting unauthentically.
Yeah. It's
right?
okay to have feelings. It's all right to have those feelings.
Yeah,
and I don't want to ever show that we're gaslighting those moments, but we can't stay there. We have to ask, what's the wise choice? What's the choice that will keep everyone enclosed and together? And I've navigated a few years in the last few years. I've navigated people sort of cut me out because they've already made an assumption about how I feel about something because I'm a Christian. And it's really interesting that those things have already been conversations are shut down before I've even been asked a question. Nobility asks a lot of questions. If you think about Daniel and how he navigated. I think this story was actually in the Apocrypha. It wasn't actually listed within the Bible. But there is a story of Daniel with the chaste woman, and that she was accused of promiscuity by two elders. And they were suggesting that she needed to be stoned. Daniel takes the two elders aside and asks them questions. Instead of making an assumption, which is what we do with the media these days, instead of making an assumption, he actually does his own research, takes the two elders aside, separates them and asks them questions. In the questions, they come out with different answers. So recognises that they've been lying about the girl, and he saves her life. For me, I'm fascinated with Daniel because he was always having to face a huge amount of adversity, never mind being thrown in fires and lion dens, which thankfully you and I don't have to really navigate these days.
Yeah, not every day.
But I think the integrity factor, not every day, some days, maybe a weekend in the ranch. There's something about the navigation of adversity in the moment and trusting in the Lord. The Exodus 14:14, you only need to keep silent and the Lord will fight for you. I've always been so thankful to Bethel because they've not needed to defend themselves. They'll allow the Lord to do that necessarily. And we also therefore are never beyond reproach. We're always ready for feedback. And I love the discussions that we have as pastors and leaders. I watch all the time having these navigation. What's the noble choice? What's the integral choice? How do we respond well? Rather than we want to react this way, but how do we respond well? And I've been so grateful for this environment alone that has kicked me in the butt when I needed it, you know.
Do you think that men and women carry nobility differently? It's
a great question. I think there are different components and skill sets, as we've talked about this with the mother and father role.
Yeah.
I've often thought that women are fantastic at looking out for the threats because they're sort of building the nest for the family. The men are the ones that have the courage to go and hunt, and very cave-like I'm talking about these things. But what I find so beautiful is the ability just to acknowledge. I think it changes in every individual and what those skill sets are. I don't know. You probably have thoughts about this. I don't know how I feel about the different genders and what they carry. I think as long as we're hungry for wisdom, the Lord will give us as many answers and options available, and if we can't do them ourselves, He'll bring us people that can. the beauty of that relationship, the man, the woman, to be able to contribute to each other's. And I don't know the Hebrew word for it, but I know that Eve actually came with a name that essentially it means tension, that she wasn't just brought to be a help, she was brought to be a tension to Adam, the sharpening of the iron. Yeah. And I think there's that lovely...
Corresponding, the word is corresponding, but it means intention, or it means opposite of.
Right, okay, thank you. There we go, this is why I knew we were supposed to have this conversation.
Yeah, Genesis 2.
Yeah, so just listening and even looking at the fall, it's so fascinating to look at the comparison. I think the poetical teaching of the fall was the fact that the comparison of the beast and the human was that the beast was a predator, could go, get what they want, respond instinctively to their feelings and whatever they wanted, where we were blessed with the gift of both desiring but also being able to manage those desires. And I think that, for me, the more I look over the fall, the more I look at the Genesis, again and again and again, I recognize, my gosh, we were just taught so much about the difference between mankind and the creation of what we have in us compared to the beast of the world, you know.
Yeah, I think that nobility is emphasized different in men and women.
Interesting.
And just from your definitions, I was just thinking through, husbands, fathers promote, protect, and provide.
Yes.
It doesn't mean women don't. Doesn't mean mom doesn't.
No.
But it feels like a perversion, like the wrong version, when mom is left to do those things.
Right. I definitely know, just single fostering, I definitely know I will try to make up for where a dad may not be around for those kids and recognize I have to bring other people in. I'm very grateful for avuncular relationships and lots of uncles in my life that will come in and do that because I can't do some of that stuff. And I'm very, very grateful for the ability to, and hopefully the humility. When I was younger and I was working in advertising, it was quite a misogynistic environment. I think we felt like we needed to protect ourselves and fight for our voices. And now I'm like, gosh, actually, I think that was a case of us thinking that we weren't enough as women. And we weren't necessarily feeling like we didn't recognize our own giftings, which was the comforter, the educator, the one that comes in and goes, oh, did you notice that? Yeah.
The compassionate one.
Yeah.
Okay, personal question.
Okay.
On nobility.
Yes.
What's the greatest challenge you have
right now?
Well, I mean, in your own nobility. You're
good question. That's a
beautiful
good question.
Single woman. I know I've had a private conversation who would love to be married. So, all of it. You have a sex drive.
Yeah.
You have dreams and visions. All of that.
Yeah.
And you have strong feelings. What's the greatest challenge you have right now in managing your own nobility? Or maybe managing your nobility is the right way to put it. So please feel free to.
It's a great way to put it. I think for me, pride is always at the cusp.
Okay, talk about that.
When I've been hurt,
I wouldn't answer the question that way.
Okay, so I feel, so if we're looking at the virtues of nobility, the ones I listed, pride is one of the hardest ones for me because 42 and single, let's use that for a moment. I'm not identifying myself as single. I'm just saying that's who I am. But I feel like the pride factor can come in when I feel like there might be a narrative or a rhetoric of going, you're not enough if you're single. That can come in. Okay. And I want to get defensive, and I have to be very careful not to get like that, because that's not what they're saying. They're just saying, oh, I wonder if we've got anyone for you, So I have to be very careful not to let that rise up, because behind that is an insecurity saying, I don't feel like I'm enough. So I have to be very careful about that.
So is it pride or is it insecurity?
I think insecurity can fuel pride. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think insecurity can absolutely fuel pride. And I feel that the more I'm around beautiful marriages that inspire me, and also people that and especially a lot of time in the secret place, time with the Lord, He'll go, let's just talk about your dreams. Let's not talk about what you don't have. Let's talk about what you do have. And it helps me to, and also processing pain, the ability to process pain better than I did 10 years ago. I used to be...
The pain of being single?
The pain of being single, just the pain of not having the very thing that I wanted for a long time. But also at the same time wanted to make sure that I was marrying the right person. So it isn't the case of like I didn't have an option. There are probably 4 times I could have done. But for whatever those reasons, there are probably 4 times I could have married.
Okay.
But but out of those 4 opportunities, I look back and I go, thank you for helping me avoid divorce. Do you know what I mean? Because I could have easily gone into that space. I feel very grateful actually for the way that the Lord has guided me, and I've never been wanted to be one of those bitter singles that goes, oh well, you wouldn't know anything because you got married at 15. You know, actually you do have a lot to share with us, and I feel like I used to be like that. I used to get a bit mad when people from the front were talking about marriage or how you should be in relationships when no one knew what it was like to be single in their 30s. I've changed that now to go, gosh, I'm so sorry that I was mad. I was just frustrated and I was taking that on other people's circumstances. And now I feel very grateful that I've been surrounded by really healthy and beautiful marriages that are actually making me make good decisions in dating. On top of that, and sorry, it's a long answer to your question,
No,
but
it's a great answer.
I do actually feel like
it's a big deal. 60% of our school ministry is women.
Right.
My guess is that 75% of them are unmarried.
You're right. I did when I was pastoring in second year. We had 880, I think, in second year at the time.
Mm-hmm.
125 of those, it would have been about 126. 125 of those students were married. I think we had about 7 widows, and then I think the rest of them were single. And I would get a lot of the students coming to me, talking to me about it. How on earth do you get through the day? You know, and I get it, I understand it, and there's definitely peak seasons where you really want it, and other times where you want. But I've been so grateful for the Lord, and I know this is going to sound trite and like, oh, tell us the real story. But I do really feel very grateful that I haven't married before this point, because I would have married out of perhaps dysfunction, perhaps out of ego. I'd have married, and I feel very grateful, even fostering as a single. My tastes in men have changed. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, the father figure is actually very attractive to me now, rather than the charmer or the one that schmoozes into a room and is very good looking. You know, that used to be, I was high on the romance and the fantasy of romance, and that didn't help me at all. So I think it's been really helpful actually to have, and I remember the Lord saying to me, this is going to teach you so much about yourself, Carrie. And then there have been narratives that say, oh, you obviously don't value yourself enough, that's why the good guy hasn't come. I don't believe in that necessarily. I think we're attracted to what we find familiar, rather than, so when girls say, oh, I'm attracted to the bad guy, but I don't want the bad guy. It's just the fact that we've probably attracted to something that was inconsistent when we were younger. And so that's why we find that attractive on some level, but we don't necessarily want to marry it, so we can get into that cycle as singles if we're not careful.
So good. We're coming to an end. This book right here, The Noble Renaissance, you're going to read that, and what is this book about?
It's basically reclaiming the lost virtue of nobility. That's a tagline. And it's basically the building of character, how we build noble character. It's not to be perfect. It's purely the excellence of morality. So letting it be a standard of what we'd like to try and achieve. Even when we get it wrong, noble people can actually navigate a forgiveness towards the self and just try again. So it's basically looking at the 7 virtues of nobility and what creates a great and beautiful character in us.
That's amazing.
I can't wait for you to write a book on nobility. If you wouldn't mind, I'd really appreciate that.
And this is the legacy letters, the prompted journal for those who inspire us.
Yeah.
This is I did go through this for like 20 minutes.
Did you really?
Yeah, and it's basically blank pages. At the top of each page is a question.
Right.
When is it best to end a relationship? And it's for you to journal.
Yeah.
Like I could see how this would come out of your own, like our conversation right here.
Absolutely.
Like these are probably questions you were asking yourself,
yeah.
right?
I mean, some people have been actually buying it for themselves and giving it to their children. There are questions that I wish I'd asked my father before he died. And they were questions that I asked my mother basically 5 years ago, and I learned more about her than knowing her for 42 years. And I'd learned that my father had been engaged before he was engaged to my mother. Didn't know that information at all.
But it came out with the journal.
And I was always, she was such a peacemaker, my mother. I wanted to know what gets her through adversity and what helps to sort of get her through it. So I asked some deep questions. And so the idea is you buy the book, give it to someone that inspires you. It can be a spiritual mentor. It doesn't have to be a parent. It could be a grandparent. But we've also been seeing it actually help people have a different perspective of a relative that they didn't necessarily get on with. And now they're learning them a different. So it's creating unity, and I'm hearing some amazing stories about what they're learning about those that have inspired them, and then they give it back to them, and then they carry the legacy with them, hopefully for the rest of their lives.
How can they buy these books?
Amazon.
They're on Amazon?
Amazon, yeah.
Both of them?
Bethel Bookstore, obviously
Bookstore.
online. Yes, both of them.
Bethel.com.
This is on back order, but we are getting more printed.
Really?
I know. We weren't expecting such a demand.
I mean, it was given away on a Sunday.
Yeah, that's it.
And
I didn't realize you guys.
A few.
You guys have got some clout. You and Bill have some serious clout when it comes to. Yeah, so it's been really lovely. I've loved learning the stories from Legacy Letters, but someone called it the noble resistance, and I'm like, no, it's the noble renaissance. It's supposed to be a renaissance, a revival of character. And I think if we as a church can work on that, we could change the game. It affects everything. Our character affects everything. It affects fatherlessness and even the fostering journey.
Carrie Lloyd,
changes everything.
You're quite a woman.
So are you, but in a man form.
No, I'm a man.
In a man form.
In a man form. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's going to be inspiring for so many people.
Oh, I hope so.
God bless you.
Thank you.